Okay, writing rubrics. First, some terms that we'll use going forward. So a rubric's generally made of 3 parts. Top part is the scoring strategy, which is the scale you're using for interpreting the judgments or the considerations. The considerations are the evaluation criteria which the student are going to be assessed against, and the descriptors is what a student must do to demonstrate those criteria against the scoring strategy. Okay, so how do we make a rubric? So the approach I talk about here is a personal approach rather than an ideal way that you should construct a rubric, and I hope some of it's useful for you. So for me, I would start with the scoring strategy, and in most cases I use the undergraduate, postgraduate generic criteria as a framework here. So either the words outstanding, excellent, very good, and so forth, or the numerical measures which are associated with those words. You can find these in the 3Rs document on the University of Derby website. Then I define the evaluation criteria. So in order to do this, first of all, I'd look at the learning outcome from the module specification. Why? Because a learning outcome is linked to an assessment. This helps consolidate to me what a student needs to demonstrate by the time they've completed this piece of work. Then I'd look at the assessment criteria stroke brief, if one exists, i.e. the information that was given to students pre-rubric that told them what they needed to do, what they needed to demonstrate in order to pass this piece of coursework. And normally these are quite useful as starter points for the evaluation criteria. So they're the basics. Now I've got my scoring strategy and I know the kind of areas that I'm looking for. Now I need to focus on the descriptors. And for many people, the descriptors are the hardest part. How do I write those? So my approach is to start with mastery. By mastery, I mean the top band on your scoring strategy. So in the way I described it, it was outstanding. And think about what that perfection would look like from a student. And of course, you have to bear in mind things such as the student's stage or level and prior knowledge in defining what that mastery may look like. And personally, I find the mastery level the easiest one to define. You know, what's a high scoring work look like? Next, I would then jump to the other end of the scale and think, okay, what's the minimum a student needs to be able to demonstrate in each of those criteria in order to demonstrate the learning outcome and pass the assessment? So I've kind of got the two extremes. Having those two extremes, I then find it much easier to put the midpoint in, what's the halfway level between those, and fill up any other gaps in my scoring strategy, knowing what the top and bottom of my scoring strategy looks like. Some general tips in descriptive writing is, well, first of all, keep them as brief as possible. You don't have to write large amounts of text. The language itself can be a bit of a barrier if you're not careful. Certainly avoid ambiguous words in the descriptors. So what's an ambiguous word? So actually an example would be a word like very good or excellent. So what's the difference between very good and excellent referencing, or fair and good critique? These are ambiguous words, and these should not be included in the descriptors. You notice there's a little star there. Sometimes you will see descriptors with ambiguous words in, and that's because a rubric is rarely used on its own. For example, I would use the rubric as part of a taught session where students have the opportunity to use or at least critique the rubric itself and understand what each of the terms in the descriptors mean. So a rubric on its own, even an excellent one, has limited value unless combined with an exercise where students have the opportunity to explore it. So if you're struggling to think how to define one of your evaluation criteria, then it's pretty obvious to say that the student will have no idea either. So if you can't define it, then the student will not be able to define it either. And perhaps that means that should not be an evaluation criteria. Another general thing is that fewer criteria better. So there's no magic number, but when you look across rubrics, you normally see a range of 3 to 5 evaluation criteria for a rubric. It is the basic kind of level. So you may be thinking, well, that's all fair and good, but I still don't know what to write. Where do I start? You know, how do I write those descriptors? Or even what are my evaluation criteria? So here are 4 tips. So if this piece of work has been marked previously, I recommend you go back to some of the feedback you've given on some high scoring and low scoring versions of that assignment, and look for any common themes. What are the common things you're praising? What are the common things you're suggesting students do? These may be indications for the things that you're looking for, or the things that students don't recognize that they normally need to do. Good examples of evaluation criteria. Second, think back, look back in your inbox or your discussion board for the main clarification type questions you get about the assignment. So, dear academic, can you clarify for me what you mean by? Okay, so with most assignments, we do receive questions. What are those questions? Are there any common themes? These give you an indication of the things the students are unsure of and maybe good starters for the evaluation criteria. Still unsure? Well, maybe worth thinking more generally about the main focus of the assignment. So is it content? Are you looking for the demonstration of specific knowledge or facts? Are you focused more on the craft, so less the specific knowledge, but how they dissect that specific knowledge, so critique and such like? Or are you interested in more of the cosmetic aspects, how it's presented? So think about, eye contact and communication style in a presentation. So maybe thinking about which of those are the most important areas of the criteria, or even, choosing some aligned to each of them depending on the assignment. And if you're still struggling, I really recommend you just go back to mastery. What does perfection look like? Define what perfection looks like. And then literally peel off a layer. Okay, so that's perfection. If I just take one step to the left, peel off a layer of my onion of perfection, what does that look like? Okay, then if I peel off another layer, what does that look like? And this will help you work backwards through the rubric. So some short tips on writing rubrics. Thank you.